Hello everyone and welcome to Slash Film Daily for September 20th, 2018. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me in today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
So we've kind of had a slow couple of days with movie news, but today the drought has ended. There's been a lot of news slammed upon us, so we're going to try to get through more stories than we normally cover on this podcast in the same amount of time. So it might be a little more brief than we normally do with the discussion, but let's get into it. Let's start out with the biggest of the big, and that is Star Wars. With Han Solo not performing as well as they had thought, we are now hearing from Bob Iger that Star Wars production is slowing down. Brad, you wrote this up for the site. What do we know?
Yeah, so we found out not too long ago, there were some rumors going around that Lucasfilm was kind of reconsidering their approach to what the Star Wars spin-offs are supposed to be and kind of getting their expectations in check and figuring out what to do. There was one report that said that the spin-offs that were supposed to be in the works and were in development were delayed indefinitely, but then some news came out sort of after that Lucasfilm was more so just figuring out which one they wanted to move forward with and how they wanted to move forward, considering they were thinking that maybe the spin-offs didn't need to be movies that were as big as the primary chapters in the Star Wars universe, the trilogy movies, and the future movies that will be new series that come from David Benioff and D.B. Weiss and Rian Johnson and whatnot. And so addressing this today, Bob Iger in an interview basically took blame for how Solo panned out and said that they were going to be rethinking how they churn out Star Wars movies. What he said is, quote, "I made the timing decision, and as I look back, I think the mistake that I made, I take the blame, was a little too much too fast. You can expect some slowdown, but that doesn't mean we're not going to make films. JJ is busy making Episode 9. We have creative entities, including Game of Thrones creators David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, who are developing sagas of their own, which we haven't been specific about. And we are just at the point where we're going to start making decisions about what comes next after JJ's. But I think we're going to be a little bit more careful about volume and timing, and the buck stops here on that." So what that sounds a lot like is they're probably not going to be churning out Star Wars movies at the same rate that they're churning out Marvel movies. I don't think that they'll stop churning out one Star Wars movie a year, but I don't think they'll go any faster than that. And I think they realized that maybe one of the bigger problems with Solo is that it came only 5 months after The Last Jedi, and maybe that wasn't enough time for fans to kind of get a break and people to, come back around and be excited for a Star Wars movie again. On top of the fact that, there were problems with Solo from the beginning, and it was a movie that even some of the most hardcore fans weren't exactly excited about or pleased with when all was said and done. So, do
you think the statement, the way he says it, kind of indicates that he thinks that was the problem, not that, that the timing was the problem and not that people just didn't want a Han Solo movie?
I feel like he was probably putting a little bit more of a positive spin on it just because he is the company's CEO. And so even though he's admitting blame, he doesn't necessarily want to acknowledge that maybe there's some fatigue there or some, disappointment from fans. So he's admitting a little bit of defeat, but also not necessarily being as negative about it as he otherwise might need to be.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask, because a lot of people, a lot of the Star Wars fans that didn't like Last Jedi are taking the fact that he did not mention the Rian Johnson trilogy that's in development, meaning that maybe Rian Johnson isn't making that anymore. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I don't think that that's a thing at all. First of all, that rumor is completely unfounded and just created to stir up trouble. And I think it's just one of those things where he's speaking off the cuff in an interview, and that's the first thing that came to his mind. If anything, maybe that's just the first Star Wars project that is further along and that will happen before Rian Johnson's, because as we know, Rian Johnson already has another movie that he's doing before he gets to work on his Star Wars trilogy. So I don't think it's anything to read into too much. It sounds like, conspiracy nonsense to me. I think Rian Johnson's Star Wars trilogy is very much still in development and still happening at Lucasfilm.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you there. I don't think that there's any trouble in that area. I think it just might be a couple years down the line. It'll be interesting to see what what Disney and Lucasfilm do with Star Wars. I think if anything, Han Solo shows them that they should be, making Ant-Man like style, a level of movies in addition to the saga movies. Do you know what I mean? Like,
or if anything, maybe they're going to just save their Star Wars story style narratives for their TV shows that they'll put on their streaming service.
That would be interesting. I wonder if they would do something like that. But let's move on to the other things that Bob Iger said in that interview, because the interview was mostly about the Me Too movement and the digital streaming service. Ben, I know that you kind of encapsulated the major talking points, that major things we learned from the conversation. Could you tell us the most interesting bits right now?
Yeah, I'll just list two of them. First up, Bob Iger implied that Kevin Feige is going to continue to run Marvel. And I know there's been some speculation that he might be leaving soon, but there was nothing in Iger's comments that indicated that at all. In fact, when the interviewer asked him if, what was going to happen when Disney acquired Fox's X-Men franchise, the interviewer asked if Kevin Feige was going to oversee everything, and Bob Iger said, "I think that only makes sense. I want to be careful here because of what's been communicated to the Fox folks, but I think they know it only makes sense for Marvel to be supervised by one entity. There shouldn't be two Marvels." He said, "Kevin's got a lot of ideas. I'm not suggesting that Deadpool might become an Avenger, but who knows?" So that's one thing there. And then the other one is that Bob Iger stands by the decision to fire James Gunn. We've talked a lot about that on the podcast, so I don't need to rehash all those details here, but the interviewer asked if in the ensuing backlash, if Iger still supported the decision to fire James Gunn, and he said, quote, "I haven't second guessed their decision." So he was talking about a unanimous decision from a variety of executives at the studio that sort of came to him with this idea to fire James Gunn, and he backed their play, and now he's even though he's seen the backlash, he is not backing down from that decision at this point.
It is funny though, the way he frames it is almost like it wasn't his decision.
Right, yeah.
So he's
it wasn't his idea. He just sort of like put the final nail in the coffin, as it were. He
listened to the people that are under him that let's move on to HBO's Watchmen TV series. This is a show that I didn't think I could would ever happen, and I didn't think I would be as interested as I am in it with Damon Lindelof, and now this news of the composers for the show. Chris, tell us about it.
Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who work together in Nine Inch Nails, and they've also composed a whole bunch of great film scores, primarily for David Fincher. They did The Social Network and Gone Girl and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. They are also now going to do the music for Watchmen, the TV series on HBO, which will be out sometime in 2019.
Well, that is very cool. Are you excited about this? Are you big fans of Reznor and Ross?
I am. I love their scores. The Social Network soundtrack in particular is fantastic. So this has me intrigued.
Yeah, I used to have that score on repeat just like while I worked. It's just such great music to work by, especially if you're working on a computer. Let's move on to another TV thing. The DC Universe was launched, I think last Friday or last Saturday. I don't think any of us have this service. This is the digital service that is going to provide comics and movies and TV, all in the DC brand name. Brad, I know you wrote this article for the site, giving us some insight on what their original programming plans are. So, Brad, tell us about the plans.
As we know, DC Universe is already live as a subscription service, but its first bit of original programming won't arrive until October 12th, when their extremely dark and gritty series Titans debuts. And when that happens, they're only going to be debuting one new episode of the series each week. It won't be a binge-watch situation where they drop the entire season at once. And it sounds like that approach is actually going to be how DC Universe conducts itself for the next couple years. They already have series adaptations of Swamp Thing, Doom Patrol, and Stargirl on the way, as well as animated shows for Harley Quinn and the third season of Young Justice called Outsiders. So what they'll be doing with those shows is up through 2019, they'll be releasing one episode of original programming each week. But then once 2020 rolls around, they'll be churning out 2 new episodes each week. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense, because by then they'll have gotten through the first seasons of their first round of original programming, and then they'll start to dig into the second seasons on top of presumably starting new shows as well. So they'll have enough output that they'll be able to start putting out more episodes of shows each week, rather than, only sticking to 1 episode each week.
Yeah. I mean, this is smart because it's going to keep a DC fan, subscribed, because they, have to, they can't just subscribe, binge watch, and then cancel. But, I don't know. I don't think there is a streaming service I would subscribe to that only gave me 1 hour of new original programming each week. Brad, would you ever subscribe to something like this?
I mean, for me personally, it's mostly just because this subscription service isn't really for me. It'd be one thing if that was the only thing they were getting out of this, but the fans also have access to, the entire library of DC animated movies, all of the DC Comics live action movies, a huge library of comic books, and all that stuff. So DC fans are getting a little bit something more out of it. For me, it's definitely not worth it, just because I'm not quite as invested in DC Comics properties as other people are. It does make me wonder if at some point, since we recently heard that Warner Brothers was possibly considering their own streaming service, if any of these shows that are part of DC Universe would also be included in the Warner Brothers streaming service that might come to life sometime down the road. Because DC Universe is looking into having Titans distributed on a streaming service internationally outside of the United States. So I wonder if that might be something that comes together along the road that allows people to see the show without having to subscribe to DC Universe only.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of interested in DC Universe, not for their original programming, but for their comics catalog. But I haven't really looked into how many comics are available on that versus, Marvel Unlimited. But I'll probably be doing that this weekend just to
Peter, also don't forget that Kevin Smith is going to be hosting a daily show on DC Universe. So it's not just 1 hour of original content per week. That's going to be a daily thing.
Yeah, but isn't DC Daily a free thing like Star Wars show?
Oh, I didn't know that. You very well could be right. Sorry to butt in with possibly wrong information.
Yeah, no, we'll have to keep an eye on this. It'll be interesting as more streaming services enter the mix. But another big piece of news that hit this morning is that they have found a director to replace Danny Boyle is the director of Bond 25. And, I think on this podcast, even Jacob Hall said an American director would never be hired to direct this movie. And what did they do? They hired not only an American director, but an auteur director who is has had creative issues with other studios over their projects. Ben, tell us about it.
Yeah, Cary Fukunaga is going to direct Bond 25. So this is very exciting news. Fukunaga is the guy who directed the entire first season of True Detective on HBO, which was tremendous. That was the season with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. He came very close to directing the It adaptation, the Stephen King movie that came out last year before he sort of fell apart. And yes, as Peter just mentioned, he has definitely had his run-ins with various studios and TV networks over the years over creative differences, and he's a very he's one of those guys that has a very strong vision for a lot of the projects that he becomes involved with. So it's sort of surprising that Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, the producers, would agree to work with him on a movie like this, because the general thinking was that they would maybe want somebody that they could easily control for a producer-driven film franchise like this. But it sounds like they're just going all in on Fukunaga, and that sounds like it could result in some pretty exciting stuff. In terms of the release date, it's been pushed back a little bit to February 14th of 2020. So originally it was we were aiming for a November 2019 release date. So it's just a few months back from that now.
Is this the first American to direct the franchise? I know Irving Kershner directed Never Say Never Again, but I think most people don't consider that part of the canon.
Yeah, that's not Eon produced. That's not a real, quote unquote, real Bond movie. So yeah, I believe Fukunaga is the first American director to helm a Bond film, which is kind of wild. He's also the only the second non-white director. He's half Japanese, I think.
Yeah, and this is a franchise that has turned down Steven Spielberg, who people. I'm not sure if they turned down Christopher Nolan. Did they turn down Christopher Nolan? We know Christopher Nolan had put feelers out that he was interested, and obviously that has not happened. So I'm very curious if this is actually going to come to fruition. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this one? I know you are kind of a Bond fan.
I mean, this is a great get, and I would love to see it happen. But as we already mentioned, he's had problems before. I mean, he walked away from it. He was supposed to direct almost a bunch of episodes of TNT's The Alienist, but he walked away from that. He threw out all the scripts for Maniac right before they were about to start shooting and rewrote them. So he's definitely someone who's very committed to his own vision, which might clash with Bond, but I feel like they have to have known that when they hired him. So I guess they're going to take their chances.
What do you think the chances of this film actually happening with this director?
I guess it depends on when they want to start shooting it. If they really start shooting it soon, I'll assume he's going to stick with it.
They would have to be shooting next year if they want to hit 2020, I would assume.
Yeah, they actually said in their official announcement that filming begins on March 4th of 2019, so not too long.
I guess we'll know then. If he's still attached by March, I'll assume it's happening, but we'll see.
You never know. He could walk off the shoot like a month into production. But let's move on to the Twilight Zone. We know that Jordan Peele is rebooting this series, and we have even speculated on this podcast if Jordan Peele would take over the Rod Serling role as host. And now we have the answer to that. Chris, tell us about it.
Yeah, so a few months ago, someone in an interview asked Jordan Peele if he would be doing, not just developing the Twilight Zone reboot, but also hosting it the way Rod Serling used to do. And he said he was resistant to the idea, but he hadn't ruled it out. But now it's official. He is taking over as the host of the show, not just the guy developing the show, but also the host. If people out there have somehow never managed to see the Twilight Zone, every episode of the original series used to start with Rod Serling, the creator, walking onto the screen and basically giving a brief synopsis of what was going to happen. And it was always amusing because he would literally just walk into a scene and no one would notice he was there. He was like this invisible man that only the audience could see. And now Jordan Peele is going to be doing that too as he takes over the show, which is kind of cool.
And I also think this is smart from a filmmaker's perspective. I feel like we've seen less of this in this day and age. And back in the day, you had Alfred Hitchcock host Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and you'd have even Steven Spielberg would come out and introduce things promoting his movies. I feel like we see less of filmmakers being the front of their productions, and I feel like we're losing kind of the iconic directors. We don't have the George Lucas of today, I think, because of that. So, it'll be fun to see Jordan Peele, who obviously has, a place on the screen as well as behind the camera, host this show. But let's move on to another Marvel show, and that is a Marvel female superhero series that has been announced by ABC. It's coming from the writer of Wonder Woman. Brad, you wrote this up for the site. What do we know?
Indeed. Well, right now, ABC only has one Marvel show, and that's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and there's a chance that series might be on its way out. It got renewed for a shortened 6th season, but there's no indication that it might continue after that. So ABC has been wanting to create another new Marvel show for a while, and now it seems like they have one. Alan Heinberg, who was the writer of Wonder Woman, is apparently working on this series for ABC from Marvel Television. He will serve as executive producer along with Jeff Loeb, Marvel Television's main dude on all of their TV projects. And it's going to be the details are pretty scarce, but it will focus on a group of female characters with superpowers. And the only thing that we know so far is that it will focus on some lesser known Marvel characters. So we won't be seeing any of the familiar characters from the Marvel Cinematic Universe or any of the more prominent characters from Marvel Comics. Like I said, no hints as to what this series might be. I feel like the best option, though, is probably something like A-Force. That was launched in May of 2015. It came after the Secret Wars crossover, and it includes a lot of lesser-known characters. The team's led by She-Hulk, who's fairly well-known, but the first iteration of the team includes superheroes like Dazzler, Medusa, Nico Minoru, and Singularity. And those are all characters who most general audiences and even some, basic comic book fans aren't super familiar with. So I could easily see them trying to turn that into a big series at ABC. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of interesting, but at the same time, me personally, as a Marvel fan, I already don't have much interest in the Marvel Netflix shows simply because they're only tangentially connected to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's some good content there for sure, but for me, I feel like it falls too far outside of the jurisdiction of the MCU to really catch my interest. And ABC is even further out because they're even less connected to it and in their own little world. So the limitations of network television combined with the fact that, I fell out of fascination with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and don't find myself attracted to, things like Cloak and Dagger. It's going to take a lot for me to be interested in this, despite the fact that it is Marvel venturing, into female-centric superhero territory. I wish they would just do something bigger, with a female team instead.
Yeah, if you had told me 20 years ago that Marvel was going to be producing 3 films a year, that they would be the biggest films of the year, and they would have, a bunch of TV shows, and Peter, you are not watching or interested in any of the TV shows, I'd be like, well, all that is wrong. I don't know. I gave Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. a try. I liked the first season of Daredevil. Actually, second season Daredevil. A lot of the other series, I liked a little bit of Jessica Jones. But, I don't know. I think Jeff Loeb is the problem here. Everything that he's involved with as a producer is just not my cup of tea. I think, Kevin Feige, it was good news, us learning about these streaming shows that are coming up with Loki and Scarlet Witch, which are going to be produced by Kevin Feige instead of Jeff Loeb. Kevin Feige was involved in the Peggy Carter series, and Jeff Loeb has pretty much done everything else. So I think going forward with those shows, when they're more connected, like you said, Brad, maybe that will get a lot more people interested. But even though this is the first female superhero series from Marvel, I don't think I would be interested just because of the inclusion of Jeff Loeb. Ben, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm sort of right there with you. I think that I'm like Brad. If it's not directly connected to the MCU, I just don't feel that pull, that magnetic need to watch these shows. So I just really haven't tuned into much beyond just a random episode here or there kind of thing. So yeah.
Okay, let's move on to another TV series that none of us are watching. I shouldn't say no one's watching, because people are watching because it's a big franchise that they're making lots and lots of stuff of. And I'm talking about The Walking Dead. They have announced they're going to be making more movies and more spin-offs in development at AMC. Chris, tell us about it.
AMC is so committed to The Walking Dead that they have plans to keep it going in some form for at least 10 years, which... Good luck with that. So what's going on here is The Walking Dead is still popular, but its ratings have dropped off a little bit. And instead of assuming that's a sign that no one wants The Walking Dead anymore, AMC is assuming they just don't want the main show anymore. So what they're planning is they're going to make a bunch of made-for-TV movies that will serve as sort of like the launch pad for several new spin-off shows about different characters. So that's the plan, at least. I mean, none of this is set in stone yet, but that seems to be the plan. All right, no one really cares about the main show anymore. Let's create different shows in this universe. Maybe people will care about them.
Chris, what would it take from any of these movies or shows to get you to want to watch them?
Oh God, I don't think anything. I don't care. I can't imagine. Maybe if it had the most amazing cast ever, but I know Fear the Walking Dead had like Kim Dickens on it for a while, and I love Kim Dickens. She's a great actress, but I never felt the need to watch it, so I really don't know.
I feel like for me, it would have to be like a filmmaker that I love, like David Fincher, who was he was attached to World War Z 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
At some point, so he must have some kind of interest in zombies. I'm not sure if he'd want to go to premium cable or cable TV, but I think something like that could get me interested. Brad, Ben, what could get you possibly interested in The Walking Dead?
If it was a crossover with Shaun of the Dead.
I was actually going to say the same thing that you were, Peter. Like, if they could turn it into like an anthology series and get, a singular auteur to come in and do like a one and done season where I wouldn't have to pay attention to any of the other Walking Dead franchise, and I could just watch that one season and be satisfied with that arc, I would have no problem tuning into something like that. But it just doesn't seem like the direction they're going.
Yeah, not at all. Let's move to our last and final story, and that is that Michael B. Jordan has been cast in a Tom Clancy movie adaptation. Ben, tell us about it.
Yeah, so Michael B. Jordan, who recently starred in Black Panther, he's got Creed 2 coming up, has scored a lead role in 2 Tom Clancy adaptations, actually. He's going to play the character of John Clark, which is one of the main characters in Tom Clancy's spy novels, in at least 2 movies. So first up, he's going to be in an adaptation of a book called Without Remorse, which is sort of an origin story for how John Clark, a.k.a. John Kelly, became an ex-Navy SEAL, and he turned into a CIA operative. And then that is going to be followed up by a Rainbow Six movie, which Hollywood has been trying to make for a long time. And the character of John Clark is sort of like a supporting character in the quote-unquote Jack Ryan verse. Jack Ryan, of course, is being played by John Krasinski on Amazon right now, but that's a TV show. This is apparently separate from that. This is going to be a new film series. Akiva Goldsman is producing, so that's kind of a bummer. Josh Applebaum and Andre Nemec are also producing, but Michael B. Jordan is producing as well, so that's good news. There's no writer or director attached to these films yet, but I just really hope that Akiva Goldsman doesn't put too much of his fingerprint on it. His track record is very spotty, as we've talked about previously. But this is kind of interesting because
by the way, this is the second time that they're trying to launch a Tom Clancy cinematic universe.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I remember being on the set of Jack Ryan. The what is that? Chris Pine? Was that the right Chris?
Yes.
Pine. It's so forgettable. But they were talking about that and how it was going to have crossovers with other movies, and that kind of didn't come to be really in a fleshed out world.
Yeah, and one of the things was when Kevin Costner, who appeared in Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, that movie you were just talking about, he plays like a recruiter character who recruits Chris Pine's Jack Ryan. That when he was still in talks to come on board that project, Paramount was thinking about making multiple movies, and one of them is Without Remorse, which is the movie they're talking about doing now with Michael B. Jordan, and they were going to have Kevin Costner play the same character in both movies, sort of like a Nick Fury of that Jack Ryan verse, if you will. And they were actually looking at Tom Hardy to star as John Clark at that point, and then Akiva Goldsman more recently was looking at Ryan Reynolds to star, but now Michael B. Jordan has taken that part. So it's a big part, and I'm glad to see him headline another major franchise aside from Creed. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, and you know, as Chris mentioned before, like it's all sort of about the filmmakers here. So I'm very fascinated to see who they get to write and direct this.
Chris, I know you read a lot of stuff. Have you read any of the Tom Clancy books? Are you excited about this?
I'm sure I'm going to offend a lot of people, but Tom Clancy is for like grandfathers. So I'm sure a grandfather somewhere will be very excited about this. But I mean, I love Michael B. Jordan, so who knows? Maybe this will turn out really cool. But I feel like Tom Clancy's books are very, at least his early books are very analytical. They're not really action stories. They've just been turned into that by Hollywood, so it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
Okay, that brings us then to the end of today's podcast. But before we get to the credits, as you will, I do want to plug a couple features that I have up on the site today. A couple months back, I visited Walt Disney Animation Studios, and I saw some early footage from the Wreck-It Ralph sequel, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and got to talk to all the people involved with that, from the directors to the writers to the animators. And I have 2 articles up on the site right now that I spent a lot of time on and would love for you to read. And they're done in a style that I think is not typical from us or even other movie websites. It's done kind of like in a story. So one of the articles is how the hilarious Ralph Breaks the Internet Disney princess scene came to be, and it kind of tells the story of how this writer who basically, you got to go read the story, but it's basically how that basically the scene that everybody's talking about came to actually be in the movie, and also the fear that Disney was going to shut it down and say no and not want them making fun of the brand and kind of making a mockery of it. And the other piece that I have up on the site is about the movie. This movie is from the filmmakers that made Zootopia, and I think people just expect this to be kind of like a fun romp, but actually the reason for making Ralph Breaks the Internet kind of stems in the core of like online bullying and some other kind of serious topics, and Disney's actually going to kind of tackle those head on in this movie in a bit, kind of in the, maybe not to the extent of what Zootopia was tackling, but you don't usually expect that kind of stuff from animated movies, and it kind of tells you how and why this sequel came about, how Zootopia put it on the sidelines, and a lot more. But I would highly recommend checking both of those articles out. You can read them on slashfilm.com, and I'll put links in the show notes. Chris, where can people find more of your work online?
I'm at slashfilm.com every day, and I'm on Twitter at Evangelista413.
Ben, where can we find your work?
You can find my work at slashfilm.com. I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks, so you guys enjoy. I will talk to you soon. You can follow my exploits on Instagram at Ben Pears.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about your adventures. Brad, where can we find you?
There's a drawing I did once on my parents' fridge. You can also find me on Twitter, Ethan_Anderton. Slashfilm.com is where I do a lot of my writing, and you can also check out my podcast, Go Flix Yourself.
You can find more about all the stories we talked about in today's podcast linked in the show notes and on slashfilm.com. Slashfilm Daily is published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.